My friends and I live in a very nice area. Try and picture the quintessential suburban neighborhood. It's relatively quiet, and people are used to the secluded, isolated feel it provides. The last place you'd expect anything dangerous to really happen. With the exception of what I'm about to tell you, my town radiated the calming silence you'd eventually come to crave. This happened a few summers ago, and as much as I try to resist it, I will never be able to erase the memory from my mind. Anyway, my friend Chaz and I had always been those kids, the ones who tried to cause trouble wherever we could. Looking back, I struggled to justify our behavior. I guess it was our teenage manifestation of a rebellious spirit or some crap like that. We lived on the same street and hung out after school every single day. Because our neighborhood consisted of nothing but very large houses and towering trees, we didn't usually have much to do on weekdays, unless we wanted to journey a few towns over. So we ended up making our own fun most of the time. In our neighborhood, there was a well-known mansion at the top of a hill that had been abandoned for as long as people could remember. It wasn't really special. Every kid who lived in my town had been inside. The rooms were essentially stripped of anything of value, and finding a wall that wasn't coated with multiple layers of spray paint was almost impossible. It was especially creepy because it stood at the edge of a massive cemetery. For Chaz and me, this cemetery mansion was kind of a default, a plan B, if you will. If we had nothing else to do, we'd throw some graffiti up inside, or just smoke and chill on the roof. This was one of those nights. It was like 3 a.m. on a Wednesday, and Chaz and I had just been flaked on by a couple girls we made plans with. The two of us were kind of upset, so we figured chucking rocks at the cemetery mansion would be a decent way to release some energy. Had we been sober, we might have been more cautious about doing something so stupid. But it was late, it was summer, and we didn't care. I convinced Chaz not to drive. We were more than a little drunk, and after about a 20-minute walk, we crested the hill and were met with a familiar yet eerie sight. Vines twisting and hanging down the muddied bricks. Most of the windows shattered, menacing points at the tip of the roof. Definitely a sinister feel, especially at such an ungodly hour of the night. Without warning, Chaz picked up a stone and chucked it toward the house. It sailed gracefully before smashing through one of the fourth-floor windows. It was difficult to confirm in the low light of the moon and surrounding streetlights, but the deafening sound of the shattering glass confirmed it. Gleefully, I picked up a rock and did the same, puncturing one of the second-floor windows. Before the mansion's fourth floor, there was a single small window, probably an attic, that stood lonely as the highest room in the house. Chaz challenged me to hit it. I missed a good 10 throws before giving up with an aggravated sigh. Chaz grinned, picked up a rock, and said, "Watch this." He took a long look at the tiny target and launched it. I watched. The rock flew through the air, shattering the attic window with a satisfying crash. I was shocked. The two of us stood there for a second, admiring what just happened. Chaz was about to pick up another rock when I, still looking at the shattered window, saw a dark object fly out of the emptiness and sail down toward us. I literally jumped, confused as to what I just saw. Chaz and I looked down at the rock that had just landed on the gravel in front of us. The exact same rock Chaz had just thrown. It was easily recognizable. It had a sort of Z imprint on one of the faces. The two of us stood there in silence, obviously a little shaken up. It was really late for other kids to be doing the same thing we were, but that was the only explanation we could come up with. We agreed that it must have been a group of teenagers trying to mess with us, an idea that actually excited us. The devious grins on our faces told the story. We were going to try and get the jump on them before they could scare us. The two of us quietly made our way to the front door, ducking under a thick vine that hung from the towering pillars above. The door was slightly ajar, but it always was. It had long since been misaligned from its hinges and didn't close properly. As quietly as we could, we stepped inside, our eyes adjusting to the minimal light and our noses to the smell of mildew and rotting wood. We slowly made our way up the creaky stairs, unable to silence the sound of shifting wood beneath our feet. We had made it to the fourth floor and were positioned at the base of the final staircase. Interestingly, we had never been up there. The entrance to the roof was on the opposite side of the house, and this room must have eluded us. Chaz took the lead, and I followed directly behind. The staircase led to a small wooden door, which we presumed was the attic door. Chaz put a hand on the doorknob and even looked back at me. I nodded, and in one fluid motion, he flung the door open. Before I could even see anything, I was struck by a smell that made me take a few reactionary steps backward. It was disgusting. It smelled like death and rot. Something was clearly decaying in that room. Chaz covered his nose and entered. I was a little more hesitant to do so, but I decided that I'd rather be by his side than alone on a pitch-black staircase. The sight was even worse than the smell. We found ourselves staring at a tiny room, the floor of which had a white pentagram painted on it. There were a few unlit candles and a closet door that we didn't open. The smell seemed to be emanating from that closet, and I was worried Chaz would want to investigate more. To our surprise, the room was void of people. I had had enough, though. This was really starting to freak me out, and I couldn't fight the urge to leave any longer. I turned toward the door, and that's when I saw it. I looked down the staircase and saw two cloaked figures looking back up at me. I cursed and ran toward Chaz. Just then, we heard stomping up the stairs from behind us. Screwed. As the stomping got closer to the door, I was prepared to fend off whoever it was, bracing myself for a fight. Just then, Chaz yelled at me, "Dude, come on!" I whipped around to see Chaz halfway out of the shattered window, presumably stepping onto the roof. I hurriedly did the same, and the second I made it onto the roof, I heard the door forcefully open behind us. We ran across the roof to the entrance we knew about, not wanting to wait to see if we were being followed. Had this situation not been so dire, I don't know if I would have been able to go through with our plan. The darkness made it nearly impossible to see. One wrong step, and we would have been sent tumbling to our deaths. I followed close behind Chaz, and we made it to the roof entrance. It was a little hatch that led to a ladder. Chaz failed to open the hatch. It was locked from the inside. Just then, we heard a booming voice ring out from somewhere in the distance. "They went that way," yelled the freakishly deep voice. To this day, it was the scariest thing I've ever heard anyone say. Without thinking, I stomped on the hatch as hard as I could with my right foot, and it gave way in a crash, loud enough to reveal our position to anyone in the house, let alone someone chasing us on the roof. The force of the impact caused me to fall into the hole, and had it not been for my hands reflexively grabbing the ladder, I would have been seriously hurt. Chaz screamed at me to go, so I climbed down as fast as I could, trying to ignore the pain in my leg. The two of us sprinted down the other staircase and burst out the back door, jumping the fence and running into the cemetery. Chaz seemed to be fine. He was literally laughing. I, on the other hand, was so scared I could barely think. I never thought squatting behind a gravestone in a cemetery could be so comforting. Chaz and I maintained a watchful eye on the mansion, half expecting someone to be following us. We waited, and just when we thought the coast was clear, we saw a group of 4 or 5 cloaked figures circling the property, frantically searching under bushes and trees. The two of us crept deeper into the cemetery until we were sure there was no chance we could be spotted in the darkness. We hopped the backside fence and haven't been back to that house since. I can only assume that we stumbled upon some kind of cult meeting or ritual. Why they decided to do it in an abandoned house is something I still ask myself. There was a house by me nicknamed Ghost House because construction was never finished on it for the longest time, and it had been sitting vacant and unfinished for years. It was on an already kind of sketchy block, with a lot of houses that appeared to be either vacant or the owners of the houses just didn't care about their properties, because there was a lot of overgrown grass and weeds. My friends Jenny, Luca, Kylie, and I were bored, just driving around town late one night. We got some fast food, then Luca floated the idea of checking out the ghost house, like actually checking it out, going inside. The girls were on board, and so of course, so was I. We parked a few houses down. This street only had one streetlight. The rest of it was dark, and a lot of the houses didn't have any lights on. So it really was a dark and kind of creepy block. Like I said, the neighboring houses seemed abandoned too, even though they weren't, due to cars being in some of the driveways. We were all sure to be extra quiet getting out of the car and walking over to the ghost house. Seeing this unfinished 2-story house in the dead of night gave off eerie vibes for sure. Next up, we had to figure out a way in. Of course, we tried the front door, and it was locked. We then walked around the house trying every window until one of them slid right open. Jenny was the smallest, so she climbed in through the window and then went to unlock the back door for us. Only, it was already unlocked, meaning anyone could have just walked right in. We entered the house. It smelled like a mix of wood and some kind of rotten cat piss kind of smell. The first floor was a lot more finished than I was expecting. It was pretty big, with lots of rooms, but there was no furniture. We kind of all split up, going different ways. I went up the stairs to the second floor. Up here was a bit more unfinished, with a lot of the wall framing exposed. I heard rustling around from downstairs, the sounds of my friends being a bit too loud, so I went really loud down the stairs. Upstairs was pretty empty, so I went back down to run into Jenny, who asked, "What's upstairs?" I said, "It's a bit unfinished up there." She then proceeded to go upstairs and check it out anyway. I proceeded to look for the basement, and I found it beyond a brown door, right under the stairs leading upstairs. As soon as I opened it, I got a whiff of that cat piss type smell I was talking about. I started walking down the steps, and as I got to the bottom, I could see the basement looked a little more decrepit than the rest of the house. The concrete floor was stained with some brownish, rusty-looking material. My first instinct was to think paint, but the color could also match blood. I looked around the mostly empty space and found in one corner a small wooden chair and a little table with a book on it. It was the Holy Bible. I heard footsteps coming down the steps. I said, in a volume slightly above a whisper, "Yo, come check this out." When I heard no response, I turned around, but didn't see anyone by the stairs. I said, "Who's there?" Then I noticed a girl sitting down, leaning on the wall. Only, it took me a second to realize it wasn't Jenny or Kylie. It was some random woman with extremely long and messy hair, looking right at me. Then I heard one of the girls upstairs screaming, followed by Luca calling my name, saying, "Let's get out of here." The only words I could muster up were, "Holy..." And I ran out of the basement, up the stairs. I saw my friends running out through the back door. I had no idea what they had seen, but I was right behind them. We ran back out front toward the car and didn't stop until we were inside. I asked them, as we started to drive away, "What did you see?" Because I saw some deranged-looking woman come down to the basement. Everyone was talking over each other, but one of the girls finally managed to explain. They saw 2 men standing in one of the empty rooms on the first floor. They saw some dark objects on the floor in that room, but they couldn't figure out what they were in those brief seconds before running away. They didn't get a look at their faces, but they were men, based on their statures. I don't know what the hell was going on in that house, if we ran into some satanic cult, or if we just ran into some homeless people. You couldn't pay me to ever go back to that house again. I don't live in that town or state anymore, so I don't know what became of that house. But based on the most recent Google Maps picture, from 2019, it still wasn't ever finished. About 8 years ago, I lived in a small mountain town, quiet, remote, and eerie in its own way. Like many towns tucked away in the hills, it had its share of vacant, forgotten homes. Some were left to rot. Others had a presence that never quite left. I had explored 2 of them. One of them changed the way I look at abandoned places forever. It started one snowy afternoon. My boyfriend at the time and I decided to visit a large old house just off a stone road where a few scattered homes still stood. It was less than a mile from where we lived, but we drove. The snow was deep, at least 8 inches on the lot. As we pulled into the long driveway, we were immediately struck by the first strange sight. Large home appliances. Refrigerators, stoves, washers, dryers, all lined up along either side of the driveway, like sentinels leading to something we weren't meant to see. The house was split level. When you walk in the front door, you can either go up to the main floor or down to the basement, but there were no stairs leading to the front door. Instead, we made our way around to the side. That door had already been kicked in. The snow had started drifting inside. Inside, the house was gutted, stripped bare. But what we saw next chilled me even more than the cold. Lining the hallway, on both sides, were dozens of those tall glass Jesus candles, the kind you can get at the dollar store. There had to be nearly 100 of them, all unlit, all just watching. We walked up the stairs that led to the main level, turned toward the kitchen, and stopped in front of a door just off to the right. Instead of a proper door, it had been sealed with thick layers of clear plastic. You couldn't see inside. We hesitated, then pushed the plastic aside. The room was small. In the middle was a single folding table, one chair, one plate, one fork, one spoon, and one cup, knocked over on its side. The air inside felt heavy, stifling, depressing, not just because the room was empty, but because of something else. It felt like someone had died in there, like their sadness had never left. There was a closet door partially open in the corner. We heard a noise behind it. Thinking maybe it was an animal, we pulled the door open, only to find a single black top hat hanging on a hook. Nothing else. I suddenly felt a surge of anxiety, like something wanted me out of there. I turned and told my boyfriend I'd wait by the stairs while he checked out the rest of the hallway. He was maybe 10 steps away when, without warning, the heavy plastic that made up the doorway we'd just come through suddenly ripped open. A massive gust of air, fast, forceful, rushed past me and barreled down the stairs. It nearly knocked me over. My boyfriend heard it too. He turned, saw the plastic flapping behind me, and sprinted toward me. He didn't say a word, just picked me up like I weighed nothing and bolted. We tore down the stairs and out the side door, back into the snow, back to our car. I've tried to rationalize what happened, but that air, that force, it wasn't natural. That plastic couldn't have moved like that on its own. Whatever was in that room didn't want us there. The second house we explored couldn't have been more different. Smaller, quieter, peaceful even. This house had been vacant for years, and part of the roof was already collapsing in. But when we stepped inside, it felt like we had traveled back in time. It looked as if someone, probably an elderly person, had simply gotten up one day and never returned. Medicine bottles in the bathroom, expired since 1994. Dishes still drying on a rack by the sink. A wallet, dentures, untouched. We explored the place with quiet respect. Found some old treasures, a vintage sewing machine, a World War I or World War II uniform, a record player with dozens of old records, and tucked away inside a drawer, a parchment book filled with records from the 1890s, railroad logs, prices of materials, personal letters between friends and family. It was like holding history in our hands. We didn't take anything. It felt wrong to disturb it. We were just there to remember, to feel the past. Years later, I returned to that road, curious to see the little house again, but it was gone.